What's up, losers? So, you might have noticed by now that my channel name is Marshmallow Skeleton. And you might also have noticed that, so far, I haven't really talked about anything related to marshmallows or skeletons. Well, my love of sugar is a story for another day. But today, at the very least, I would like to reassure you all that I am, in fact, spooky. Yeah, that's right, I'm a spooky guy. Nobody loves horror, gore, and crime more than your old pal Skelly. And in light of this spookiness, today I'm going to be sharing some creepy stories from the subreddit /letsnotmeet, which is a subreddit dedicated to stories of scary and dangerous encounters. /letsnotmeet has pretty high standards for the posts it accepts. And this means that the content you see there is usually of a higher standard than your average Reddit fare. I can't personally vouch for the veracity of the claims put forward in the posts. But at the very least, they're engaging to read. And it is an interesting exercise to imagine what you might do if you found yourself in a similar situation. So, get your teddy bear or comfort blanket, and prepare yourself for some truly disturbing stories. The first story we're going to read today was posted by Unlucky Clown 13. And it is titled, Kidnapped from Home. So, without further ado, let's get into it.
I'm aware that this might be a bit long, but this is probably the scariest event of my life. So when I was 9 years old, I lived in Mexico. And let's just say that it wasn't a particularly peaceful year when it came to crime. At that point, I was living with just my mom in my childhood home up in the mountains near a forest wick. Full disclosure, I absolutely loved my home, since I was a big fan of nature. One night I woke up from an absolutely horrible nightmare and quickly made my way to my mom's room to wake her up because I was so panicked. After I stopped crying, I got into the bed with her. And as we were falling asleep, I told her that I didn't want to live in that house anymore. And all my mom said was, I promise this is the last night you have to sleep in this house. And that was a haunting promise that was kept. We were woken up while it was still dark by my dog barking nonstop outside. My mom got out of bed grumbling about him being so loud that early, and made her way to the front door that led to the front garden where my dog was yapping away. We had an alarm system on the doors and windows, so I just heard my mom deactivate it in order to check on what was going on with my dog. I was still laying in bed because I was cold and it was still too early to go to bed, when suddenly I heard my mom scream, which caused me to stand up and call for her. Not even 30 seconds later, a man dressed fully in black and wearing a balaclava came into the room and told me to get dressed. And I quickly did as I was told. They took me to the living room where two men, dressed exactly the same as the one who got me, had my mom with a bandage over her eyes. I just remember her begging the three men to leave us alone and telling them where her wallet and valuables were. But one of them just said, "That's not why we're here." They proceeded to put pillowcases over our heads and shoved us into the trunk of our car. After this, the rest of the events were a bit fuzzy since it was hard to tell time, and our sight was so limited. They hid us somewhere in the forest, hidden between a rock wall and a bed mattress. I can't really say how long we were there, and I have vague memories of one of the men's back that I caught a glimpse of when I peeked under the pillowcase. All my mother did was pray non-stop. 1. Because she truly believed in God, but 2. Because Mexicans are extremely religious, and it might dissuade them from killing a mother and child. After being moved to another location, inside a seemingly abandoned house, they called my family to ask for ransom. We couldn't really hear most of the conversations, but the man we'd nicknamed the Mean One felt the need to tell me that my father didn't love me and that they were going to send him a few of my fingers if he didn't pay up. Shortly, we were loaded into another car, where my mom started begging one of the men to not kill us. They drove around for what felt like hours until they suddenly stopped and dragged us out and told us to get on our knees. At this point, my mother was certain that we were going to get shot. So she asked that if they did, to shoot me first in order for me not to hear my own mother die. The men said nothing, and we abruptly heard the car peel out, and my mother just screamed at me to run as fast as I could. We ran for a few minutes and then saw a residential area, where we started frantically knocking on the doors, hoping that the kidnappers didn't plan on coming back for us. To our desperation, nobody in the first 2 houses opened up their door, when suddenly, an old man opened up at the 3rd house. And after trying to explain to him and seeing the state we were in, he let us come in and call my father. After he picked up the phone, all I could do was cry after hearing his voice. He came to get us. And that night was the first and last time I ever saw my father cry.
Wow, my first reaction to that story is, thank God OP and her mother got out of all that unscathed. I can't even imagine how traumatic an experience like that must be. Especially at such a young age. To be taken from one's home without warning, by armed bandits, and held captive for hours. That's the stuff of nightmares. No doubt. Threatening to chop off OP's fingers is also all kinds of messed up. Kidnapping people for ransom is bad enough on its own. But deliberately frightening a child, for no reason other than your own gratification, is just sick and depraved. The threat must have been especially terrifying. Given OP's age, and the circumstances under which the threat was made. Shudders. The fact that OP's mother actually asked the men to shoot OP first, to spare her the experience of watching her mother die, speaks to how hopeless it must have felt for both of them. They must have felt like the longer the whole ordeal went on, the less likely it was that it would end safely for them. And if OP's recollection is correct, the kidnapping dragged on for hours. And then, just as they think their lives are about to be snuffed out, they are inexplicably set free. I guess the kidnappers couldn't go through with it after all. Or maybe something else just came up. Who can understand the criminal mind? Regardless, I can't even imagine what it must be like to pick up the pieces after an experience like that. I applaud OP and her mother for their mental strength in overcoming that waking nightmare. And I especially applaud OP for sharing her crazy story with all of us. Truly chilling. Let us all hope that we are never unfortunate enough to have something like that happen to us. The next post is titled, Home Invasion, and it was posted by the user, Typical Succotash 41. Interesting username that. This story is a bit of a long one. So let's get straight into it.
Hi everyone. This incident happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I never really tell anymore, because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in this situation without really understanding how differently your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic. But you guys seem to get it. So, here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, around 4:30 p.m., unlocked my door, and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut loudly behind me, and began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was habit for me to not lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I've never forgotten to lock my door once in the 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I'd started earlier in the day before work. My front door opened, and I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early and I was happily called out to him. "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence, and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of, something is wrong, crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't heard me, and walked out into my living room, kitchen area. Standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me, I would estimate 50s, but it's hard for me to recall exact facial features or details from this moment. And was just standing there, staring at me, no ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if he'd maybe walked into the wrong apartment, and was going to apologize and leave. But as he continued to stare, I realized I needed to do something other than just gape at this stranger in my house. I stood taller, puffed up my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, and used a loud, clear voice, telling him to get out of my apartment, that he had no business being here. He completely ignored me, like I hadn't spoken. Then he began to pick up my things. My cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. That's when it truly hit me that this person was dangerous. I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forward toward the only other device I had that would allow me to get help. My computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but still had about 12 to 15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me, and I sprinted back toward the bathroom, because it was the only place I could go and put two locked doors between us. My bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds I could hear him messing with it, trying to open it. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent message after message, pleading with him to call 911 and tell them there was an intruder in the apartment. He got the messages within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone, and was leaving work himself to try and get to me if he could. I waited, and waited. The bathroom door opened, and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started trying to break that door down too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice on how I should have acted. But all I can tell you is that I was frozen. With fear, with shock, I don't know, but I didn't scream, or cry, or search for a weapon in the dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet and waited to die, because I just knew that's what was going to happen. People like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I'd screamed someone would have heard and come to help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet to use to defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had would hurt if I swung it at someone. Why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that. But the closet door, miraculously, held. I heard frustrated footsteps go back out into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, my drawers, and refrigerator, and cabinets being flung open, as things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying, wanting to leave, but feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in that moment, but I messaged my mom, who lived a 15 hours drive away, and told her what was happening. I desperately wanted comfort, and to tell her how much I love her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her through, knowing her daughter was in danger, and there was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me constantly, begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers I loved them, to help my husband through whatever happened next if it ended badly for me. The intruder started messing with the closet door again, mumbling disjointed words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened again, and it was my husband, shouting for me. The intruder walked out toward the living room kitchen area again, where my front door was located, and I opened the door, and darted from the closet, to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling, at times yelling, but never really put up much resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filled with fear, mostly for my husband at this point. Eventually, the police found the apartment. It took them about 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that. But from the time my husband dialed 911 to the time officers arrived, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just always seemed like this was an unusually long response time for a home invasion. They got my things back from the man and took him out of my apartment. I numbly went through the process of filing a police report, telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I should really keep my door locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being insensitive at the time, or blaming me for what happened, but later recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he's seen this situation end differently for other women. Within 30 minutes the scariest incident of my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, the anxiety of having someone intrude into my space for years. If it happened to me once, it could happen again. If you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Please consider continuing, because this isn't all doom and gloom. If this or something similar has happened to you, and you're still struggling with the aftermath of it, the sleepless nights, the laying awake, listening for sounds of forced entry, the nightmares, the constant checking and rechecking your locks, This is what eventually helped me. A year after this took place, my husband and I moved to the Midwest for his job. We selected a safe town, with a nice apartment complex, and chose a third-floor apartment with only one point of entry. I looked up every statistic on crime for the neighborhood, finding that an isolated incidence of car theft was the only thing reported in decades. I still couldn't sleep at night. It was definitely better than staying in the same apartment in Memphis. But my husband often works night shifts now, and I simply couldn't continue being terrified to sleep at night. I realized my biggest fear wasn't that something could happen again, but that if it did, I was just as unprepared now as I was then. I hadn't changed anything, other than locking my door, and I knew I would likely freeze up again, and leave my life up to being able to hide well enough, or having a door hold long enough to save me, and that was unacceptable. I walked into a martial arts school with an excellent self-defense program, introduced myself, and started talking classes. At first I was quiet, hiding in the back of the room, and generally keeping to myself. My instructor, who is both incredibly kind and incredibly insightful, slowly built up my confidence, and brought me out of my bubble of fear. After several months of training, I finally shared my reason for taking classes with him, and he's worked with me tirelessly to give me the ability to protect myself in any environment. I've been training for years now, and the difference it has made in every aspect of my life is unbelievable. The meek, quiet girl that waited to die in her closet doesn't exist. I am confident, I am strong, I am worthy of living and protecting myself in my home. I no longer am ashamed of how I handled the situation I was in. But I also understand what steps I can take to ensure that I'm safe. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was worth it. I recognize this might not be a solution or option for everyone. Your experience is valid, and however you decide to cope with your own story is the right choice for you. This is how I happen to do it, and it's worked well for me. Thank you again for listening. I'm a little afraid to share this, because I'm not sure how people will respond, but maybe doing so will help someone else that's feeling alone with this. If anyone is struggling with their own story and wants a kind ear to listen, I'm here. Stay safe out there.
Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. To begin with, I must admit that few things scare me more than the prospect of a home invasion. There's just something uniquely frightening about someone you don't know, with bad intentions, intruding into the one place where you expect to be completely safe. I'm no agoraphobe, but I think that when I'm out in public, on some level, I'm always on guard against possible dangers. Probably because I've had a few experiences where I was attacked or accosted on the street. But when I'm at home, I'm totally at ease, and that ability to fully relax in my own private space is something I really cherish. For these reasons, I consider home invasions a truly awful category of crime, and an experience that I hope I'm never confronted with. It should come as no surprise, then, that I really empathize with OP and am glad she made it through the whole thing okay. It's pretty frustrating to hear that people have tried to tell her what she should have done differently. The reality is that you never know how you're going to react in a crisis until it happens, and the level of control you have over yourself in those moments is nothing like the control you exert in everyday life. It's one thing to come up with a plan in the hypothetical, and another thing entirely to execute that plan in the real world. OP's boyfriend deserves a lot of credit for stepping up to help her, especially considering the tardiness of the police SMH, but acknowledging the boyfriend's MVP performance doesn't make it okay to blame OP for her failure to act. Also, while I think it's really cool that OP has regained her confidence through martial arts, I think it is worth recognizing that sometimes there's nothing you can do, no matter how well prepared you are. For example, if you're confronted with an armed attacker at distance, no amount of martial arts skill is going to save you. For this reason, I think that we should encourage people to be prepared, while also accepting that sometimes there is just nothing you can do, infuriating as that might be. My final note on this story relates to the perpetrator. Obviously his conduct is inexcusable, but I must admit that I am a little curious about what was going on with him at the time of the attack. His alternating attempts to steal random items and attack OP, as well as the apparently random nature of the attack, suggest that he was suffering from some kind of mental impairment. Whether this might have been caused by drug use or some kind of mental illness, one can only speculate. Either way, it just goes to show that you never know what kinds of demons people might be struggling with. So keep an eye out for signs that people are behaving erratically. And wherever possible, take precautions to ensure that you are not in the firing line if this behavior spills over into violence. The last post I'm looking at today is a shorter one, with the creepy title, "A Car with No Door Handles." It was posted by Living Perspective 86. Here we go.
Context: I was 26, and I'm a lady. I needed gas, and it was around 11 p.m. on a Saturday. I pulled into a busy gas station to fill my tank, except it was completely bare. Not a car in sight. I also live in Alaska, and it was very cold this night. Maybe -10. Tired after work, just wanting to get home. Usually I start my pump and sit in my car, due to the freezing cold. But this time I had a weird feeling that I needed stand by the pump. So I did. I just started pumping my gas when a little golden sedan pulled up right next to me. A guy got out, and I was feeling hypervigilant for some reason. He started cleaning his completely clean windows. As he put back the squeegee, he started towards me. I felt like I wanted to run, but stayed calm, and continued pumping. He asked me if I would help him put windshield wiper fluid in his car, because he ran out, and he doesn't know how to open the hood. I laughed it off, and told him I don't know either, which was a lie. He kept getting closer and closer to me, while trying to lure me into his car by saying there's something under his seat he can't reach because he is too big. Now, I'm 5'2" and petite. This man was large and scruffy. Think Alaska wilderness dude. At this point I'm freaking out, and hit the call button on the pump. He took a step back, and started to go back to his car. I thought I was being smart. My gas is almost done. I looked in his car, when I noticed the insides of the doors had no handles, except for the driver door. That freaked me out. I was putting the pump back and opening my door. He was right behind me, slammed my door shut, and yelled, "You're coming with me." Obviously I refused, and I was petrified. He grabbed my arm, and slammed me against my car. I elbowed him as hard as I could. I started to scream at the top of my lungs. Thank God for the gas attendant, with a big-ass gun, that night, because if not for him, I don't know what would have happened. The attendant pulled the video, and we made a police report. I called immediately after that guy took off. I never heard anything else about it. I just hope he didn't get some other girl alone. So to the guy with no door handles, let's not meet.
Okay, so, if I'm being completely honest, I don't know that I believe this story. The relative lack of detail, when compared to the other two, as well as the almost comically rapey behavior of the guy, make me less inclined to believe it than the other ones. But I will give OP the benefit of the doubt. If this truly happened, it must have been scary as hell, knowing that, if the guy got you in his car, you'd have no way of even attempting to escape. Shudders. That's about as bad as it gets. Some serious serial killer vibes. I feel like it's not even worth pointing out that you shouldn't get in a car with a stranger. Because it's 2022. Everybody knows. Does anyone even hitchhike these days? You'd have to be a lot braver than me. Even though statistically, you'd probably be fine most of the time. If you get unlucky, you're in for a really bad time. In a case like this, your odds are even worse. This guy didn't even try to come up with a plausible pretext to get OP into his car. In what world would she have believed his story about the windshield wiper fluid? That's just low effort SMH. I'm disappointed. All jokes aside, if the story is true, I'm just glad OP got out of it okay. And if not, well, you got me. Kinda. Not really. But anyway, I think I'll call it a day here. Thanks for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed the stories and my commentary. Don't forget to like and subscribe, or I'll have a chloroform rag for you. Just kidding, haha. Sorry, that was probably in bad taste. Anyway, catch you later.